Your front page. Okay, online students, can you see?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let us begin with the new chapter, photosynthesis. Okay, keep your textbook, notebook open, and whatever I tell you, whenever I tell you something related to that, you just mark in your textbook by pencil or write it there as and when I tell you something related to the part of the chapter. So what we are going to start with the new chapter, that is 12, chapter number 12, page number 138, photosynthesis. You have learned photosynthesis, but not in detail. You know the reaction, what happens in the process of photosynthesis, that you have learned, right? What is that? In presence of sunlight, plants prepare their food material using water, and what is produced by this process? Food is produced, maybe in the form of carbohydrates, and what is released? Oxygen gas is released. So which gas is utilized for the process of photosynthesis? Carbon dioxide. So what, see here in this, you can see in the picture what is used: carbon dioxide, water. Arrows are given towards the plant where chlorophyll is present, and in presence of sunlight, what is produced? This is the arrow. What is produced? Glucose, and what is released is oxygen gas. Okay, let us see. See what happens in the photosynthesis, and which plants or which organisms they show this process of photosynthesis. All organisms which contain the photosynthetic pigment in them, they all are able to produce food material in presence of light by the process of photosynthesis, right? So almost all plants are photosynthetic. They are called as autotrophs. Auto is self, trophism, producing food material, as they are. And again, some of the bacteria which contain the photosynthetic pigment, some of the protists which are able to perform the process of photosynthesis using their photosynthetic pigment in their body, they are all considered to be the autotrophs. Which auto is self. So autotrophs, most of these plants are they called as autotrophs, whereas autotrophs are again two types: photoautotrophs and chemoautotrophs. Photoautotrophs means the one which produce food material in presence of light, photon, that is light, whereas chemoautotrophs, with the help of chemical compound present in their body, they produce the food material. So they are two types. Then sunlight is transformed to energy stored in the form of chemical bonds. So these are some of the examples given which are considered to be autotrophs. That means mosses, ferns, flowering plants. Then some kelp. These are algae. Kelp is an example of algae. Then euglena, cyanobacteria. These are some of the examples. There are, as I told you, that most of the plants, they are considered to be autotrophs, as they show the presence of photosynthetic pigment. Why is photosynthesis important? Until and unless something is useful to us, we will not even think about it. So why we need to study photosynthesis, how it is helping us, that we will see some of the points. Photosynthesis makes organic molecules in the form of glucose out of inorganic molecules or materials like carbon dioxide and water. So first thing is what? Organic molecules are produced. For example, glucose. Glucose is produced, carbohydrates in the form of glucose, they are produced by plants by this process of photosynthesis. And by using what? Inorganic substances like carbon dioxide and water. It begins all food chains and food webs, and thus all life is supported by this process. You know the meaning of food chain and food web? Food chain, for example, producers, consumers, in that primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, topmost consumers. Then after the death of the topmost consumers, then by using decomposers, they, whatever the producers are using the compounds, they go back to the soil or the air. In that is what the chain, that is called food chain. Food chain in the sense what? Suppose producers means plants. On plants, what is dependent? Herbivores. Herbivores like rabbits, right? Then cows, cattle, herbivores. Then from cattle and rabbits are the food of what? Carnivores, right? Then carnivores, maybe primary carnivore. Then after that, secondary carnivores are also there. Suppose fox is considered to be the primary carnivore, then fox is eaten by some higher like lion or tiger, something like that, isn't it? So this is what food chain. Food babies means what? Not necessary in that chain same animals are included. There are different types of animals, and these food chains are interrelated to form a wave. That is what food wave. This is not included here, but I am telling you. You might be knowing also, some of you, but that is what called as food web. So for all that, what is responsible? What is the basic thing required? Plants. That is what? Plants. And why plants? Because they are producers. They are producing the food material. So everything else, all heterotrophs are dependent on autotrophs, isn't it? So this is what. And it makes oxygen gas, which is very important. You know why? Why oxygen is important? They are all the higher organisms which are considered to be aerobes. They need oxygen for the process of respiration, right? So oxygen is very important for our life, to survive, to live, isn't it? This is what the reason why we need to study this photosynthesis, right? Now, as just we were talking about the required things. First is what? Chlorophyll, then what? Oxygen, carbon dioxide, and then in presence of sunlight, they produce food material. So one by one, these all required points we will discuss. Now first, light. Now you know everybody, sunlight is the source, main source, right? But we need to know what different types of lights are there and what are the absorption spectrums, or at what wavelength these are absorbed. So for that we need to have few more important points to know and remember. Now here, electromagnetic spectrum and visible light, that we will study. Now the wavelength below visible spectrum, that starts from 100 nanometer up to 0.01. These are before the visible spectrum. These are the spectrums as ultraviolet, X-rays and gamma rays. Okay, whereas after the visible spectrum, whatever the absorption of, or the wavelength which are used for the absorption of light, these are considered to be known as, after this visible at the end, that is infrared microwaves, then radio waves, and their range is given here. So what you need to remember is only this area, the absorption of wavelength, which starts from at around 400 nanometer up to the 700 nanometer. This part only is considered to be the visible light, where we are able to see. That is only visible. This range of wavelength, that is only considered to be visible, we can see. Okay, now this is what you can remember. In visible light, you have heard the word Vibgyor, right? V, I, B, G, Y, then O and R. That is called as Vibgyor, right? So what is that Vibgyor? V is for violet, I is indigo, see violet, indigo, then blue, then bluish green to green, then orange, sorry, yellow, orange and red. Can you see? This is what the range by which we can see all these different colors. These are the different colors which are considered to be visible by human eyes, our naked eyes. So before this, that means before below 380, the which one is nearest to the violet, that is ultraviolet, less than violet, so ultraviolet, right? Then X-rays, then gamma rays. This is to this side before violet, whereas last one, which is seen up at around 780, 760, 700 around, absorption wavelength length. Then that comes after that, whatever comes is infrared, microwaves and radio waves. So simplest form you need to remember, the same is given in your textbook. Now, what this photosynthesis means, putting together with light. Synthesis is what? Production, you remember. Formation, production, putting together in presence of light. Photon is light. So using all these raw material like chlorophyll, then sunlight, CO2, then something is produced, that is the food material in the form of glucose is produced, water is released, oxygen is produced. So this is what the process. Now plants use sunlight to turn water and carbon dioxide into glucose, and glucose is a kind of sugar. Everybody knows that. We have learned biomolecules. Plants use glucose as food for energy and as a building block for growing. Autotrophs make glucose and heterotrophs are consumers of it. As I explained the food chain and food web. Have you understood? Auto self, hetero different, depending. Okay. So autotrophs, they produce their own food material. All green plants are the, and some of the bacteria, cyanobacteria, they are the examples of autotrophs. Maybe photo or chemoautotrophs, and heterotrophs which are dependent on autotrophs. They also consume food material from those autotrophs, right? So now the second important requirement which is used in case of photosynthesis is what? Chlorophyll. Where it is present, that contain the chloroplast, which are the part of plant cells, without which they cannot produce food material. So when we study the structure of chloroplast, they absorb light energy and convert it into chemical energy is the most important role of chloroplast. How they are performing, how this conversion of this light energy into chemical energy takes place. To know that, you need to know the internal structure of chloroplast. You have learned to some extent the structure of chloroplast, but I will revise it right now. See, this chloroplast shows these two outer and inner membranes, that is double membrane structure. In plant cell structure, you have learned it, right? So inside which, whatever this fluid or the liquid or semi-solid structure which is present, that is called a stroma. And in the stroma, these disc-like structures, like coins, which are placed one above the other, these grana are present. That a single granum means a group of or a bundle of thylakoids, because each granum shows the presence of these disc-like substances, the structures called thylakoids. Okay, and these thylakoids are the, what you can say, place or the site where this absorption of light, that is sunlight, takes place. Okay, so this is the granum part. These are all grana. Each granum contains n number of thylakoids, and this is stroma. Now what is the role of stroma? That I will tell you in the next. So for both stroma as well as grana, both the parts of chlorophyll are very much important for the process of photosynthesis. So absorbing light energy to make chemical energy. Pigments, they absorb different colors. Main pigment is chlorophyll A, whereas accessory pigments are chlorophyll B and carotenoids. And these pigments absorb all wavelengths of light but not green. Now you remember whatever the visible spectrum we learned, that you need to remember. Okay, then there are basically two types of pigments, chlorophyll pigments. One is called as main important or reaction center, that is chlorophyll A, and remaining chlorophyll B and carotenoids, they are considered to be accessory pigments. You know the meaning of main and accessory. The main, which one is functional, and accessory, which are helping, assisting, that means helping. Okay, so chlorophyll A is considered to be the main pigment, whereas remaining chlorophyll B and carotenoids, they are considered to be accessory pigments. Carotenoids contain xanthophyll and carotenes of different colors. Okay, so chloroplast is the site of photosynthesis, which occurs organelles in the plants. These are present in the plant cells, And green plants have chloroplast and carry out photosynthesis. Now, what are the parts of green plants where the photosynthesis take place? What are the green parts of the plants? Main is leaves, then young stem, right? So whatever the green part is there, that shows the presence of chloroplast, and there the process of photosynthesis takes place. And those all pigments like chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and carotenoids, which contain xanthophyll and carotenes, they are considered to be the accessory pigments which absorb light. Now, what is the role of this accessory and main pigments? We will see. What the main pigment, that is chlorophyll A, only is having this property to convert this light energy into chemical energy. Whereas all remaining accessory pigments, what they do? They absorb the light from the sunlight, that in the form of photon, and they transfer it to the chlorophyll A. So that the chlorophyll A becomes the reaction center. Are you getting my point? All the pigments are present, but the main pigment is what? A, and remaining as accessory. So all these accessory pigments, they trap the light energy from the sunlight and they pass it, transfer it to chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A also traps the energy from the sunlight, as well as it receives the energy, light energy from the accessory pigments. And what it does, it transfers this light energy into chemical energy. Now what is that chemical energy? That is in the form of ATP. Okay, so how it is produced, that we will see later. So most of the plants, this photosynthesis primarily takes place in leaves, that is in chloroplast. And as I explained just now, the structure of chloroplast, which contains a fluid or liquid or semi-solid structure, that is called a stroma. And these grana, which are nothing but the stack of thylakoids, right? So the stacks of thylakoids, that is grana. So thylakoids contain chlorophyll, and which captures sunlight, that is trapping of energy in the form of light, that is light energy, and then it converts. Now this is again the structure which is very clearly shown. This is what this yellowish colored structure is stroma, whereas these disc shaped structures, a single disc is thylakoid, right? And a stack of thylakoid together is called as granum, right? So there are 2 points to be remembered: which reactions take place in grana and which reaction takes place in stroma. Now I will tell you in the next. So there are different types of pigments, as I mentioned. This is the structure of chlorophyll A and B. How it looks? It looks like a ring, which is considered to be ring-like structure as head, and this long chain, which looks like a tail. Can you see? This is the head and this is the tail. Tail is considered to be called as phytol tail, and this is the head, which is porphyrin, made up of porphyrin. So porphyrin head and the phytol tail. This is the chemical structure of chlorophyll A. Now, these pigments which absorb light, if you see, the maximum absorption in this diagram is at around, if you see here, 480 or around 500, that shows chlorophyll B. Then is the chlorophyll A, and then carotene, that is the carotenoids, beta carotene, and then xanthophyll, these are the carotenoids, so beta carotene. At what absorption their maximum, they are showing the wavelength at what their absorption is at what wavelength, that is seen in this picture. That is what absorption spectra, that is called as absorption spectra. And action spectrum of photosynthesis means what? At what wavelength the maximum photosynthesis takes place. This is at what wavelength maximum absorption is taking place in this graph. Whereas in this graph, you can see maximum photosynthesis taking place at what wavelength. Now here you can see he at around 680 to 650, the maximum photosynthesis is taking place. This is the highest, isn't it? Same here. So where is seen, this is at around red color, Here it is the blue colored structure where the maximum photosynthesis is taking place. Now this is the range of visible light. You can see the colors starting with violet, blue, then all these colors, and this is the red. So blue, violet, blue, especially blue, and then to some extent not green, blue and red color, their maximum absorption is seen. Can you see in this diagram? This is what maximum photosynthesis is taking place at these two colors. Now, what exactly happens? This is the simple form you can see in this diagram, that is leaf, which is considered to be the site of photosynthesis, that means which are containing the chlorophyll pigments. So what happens then in chlorophyll pigments? CO2 is taken from the atmosphere, water is utilized, and in presence of light, what is produced? Glucose, and what is released is oxygen. So this is a simple diagram which shows the photosynthetic reaction. Now you remember how it takes place. It takes place in 3 steps or 3 stages. Okay. One first step in the process of photosynthesis is capturing energy from sunlight, as I told you. So what are included in capturing the energy? I told you just now. Which part of the but which part? No. Grana, that also which contains thylakoids. This disc shaped structures I showed you, isn't it, in the granum? So they show the presence of the pigments. Okay, and they are capturing the sunlight. So capturing energy from sunlight, this is the first step. Then second is what? Using energy to make ATP and NADPH. So this energy, which is in the form of light, which is captured, that is converted into chemical energy. That is what? In the form of ATP and NADPH. That is the usable form of energy. That is called as usable form of energy. Understood? So these are the 2 steps, and the third step is what? Using ATP and NADPH to power the synthesis of carbohydrates from CO2. Now, have you understood? This part is taking place by thylakoids, granum part. Again, there itself, this conversion takes place. And then, whatever this energy is produced, that is utilized to produce the food material using CO2. So, this energy which is captured from thylakoids, and in presence of this is also used, and what is produced is food. Right, so these 3 steps are involved in the process of photosynthesis. First 2 steps require light. Without light, cannot take place. So these are considered to be light dependent reactions. Whereas the third step doesn't require light. Once the energy is produced, that energy is utilized for the process of, for the formation of or the production of food material. So that doesn't require light. So this third step is considered to be light independent reaction. So the first 2 steps need light. So they are considered to be light reactions. Third step is called as light independent, which is independent of light. That means dark reaction. Okay. What happens in the photosynthesis? What means you know the formula of photosynthesis. But previously, what it was considered that until 1930s, it was thought that photosynthetic reaction is reverse of respiration. Now let me know what happens in respiration so that you will understand what opposite to that or reverse of respiration. Do we respire? How do we respire? What is the main thing happens in respiration? We take in and release out. So reverse of this means what? Taking in CO2 and releasing out oxygen, right? So it was considered like this. That means what? oxygen is evolved through CO2. That was considered. But in 1937, Robert Hill demonstrated that isolated chloroplasts evolved oxygen when illuminated with suitable electron acceptor ferricyanide. This is called Hill reaction. No, you will not understand right this part, but I will let me tell you what happens when Robert Hill performed the experiment. In his experiment, what he did, he used, instead of water, he used the chemical which is considered to be electron acceptor. So when in his experiment he used water, whatever, what happens when splitting of water takes place, you know the formula of water, H2O, that is made up of H and OH. So from H, that is hydrogen ion concentration, when electrons are released, these electrons were accepted by the electron acceptor, that is ferricyanide, and that got reduced to ferrocyanide, that is reduced form of Fe. Fe, here you can see plus 3, right? And when it is reduced, what happens? It becomes 2, that is reduced. So ferric form got reduced to ferrous form. This is what electron acceptor. Then from where these electrons came? These electrons came by splitting of water. Okay, when water is splitted, that H2O is the formula, you know that. That means it is made up of H plus and OH minus ions, right? So when the splitting of water takes place, from there, if you see oxygen, the two molecules for equilibrium, we are using two molecules showing. So O2 plus 4H. From there, when electrons are removed, then what these electrons are accepted by the ferricyanide, which got reduced to ferrocyanide. And this, from this experiment, he could prove that there is splitting of water and that oxygen comes from water and not from CO2. But it was not totally clear by his experiment. So again, to prove the same thing, that water doesn't come from CO2, but sorry, oxygen doesn't come from CO2, but it comes from water. To prove that, a group of scientists like Rubin, Randall, and Kamen in 1941, they performed one experiment where they used heavy isotope of oxygen. You know isotopes. Oxygen, normal oxygen is represented by O16. Heavy, that is O18. That is the ISO. ISO is similar but heavy. So isotope of oxygen, that is O18 type of oxygen was utilized. So when water and CO2 both are utilized in presence of light, what is produced? Water is produced, CH2O and oxygen is released. This is the normal this thing. Okay. So in this normal reaction, now he used oxygen which was in CO2. CO2 also contains oxygen. So in the first step, he used the heavy isotope of oxygen in the form of CO2. That CO2 was containing heavy isotope of oxygen. Then when oxygen is released there, or even water is released, then what he observed, that oxygen doesn't show any heavy isotope. It was of normal type. But where it was seen, that heavy isotope in the form of CH2O as well as that water which is released. Okay. But when this oxygen, heavy oxygen was used in the form of water, water containing heavy isotope was used, then in this reaction you can see here, the oxygen which was released is of heavy type, heavy isotope of oxygen. That means what? From where it came? From this experiment, that group of scientists like Rubin and Kamen could prove that this oxygen, from where it is coming? From water. Because when CO2 is utilized with heavy isotope of oxygen, the oxygen which is released of normal type. But when water containing heavy isotope of oxygen is used, what the oxygen released is heavy. isotope of oxygen. That means from where this oxygen is coming? From water. So there is splitting of water, and then from water this oxygen is released. Understood? And that splitting of water is called as photolysis. Lysis is was what? Breaking or destruction. And photo, in presence of light, water is splitted, and then there is release of oxygen. Photolysis. Will you remember? Okay. So plants produce oxygen gas by splitting water. And the water, oxygen liberated by photosynthesis is made from oxygen in water, that is H plus and electrons, that is ions, positive and negative, you know. Now, photophosphorylation. Using this process, that is splitting of water. So splitting of water is nothing but the Hill reaction, is also known as photolysis of water. That means Hill reaction shows photolysis of water or proves photolysis of water. Will you remember? In your textbook also in short it is given. So Hill reaction that proves or shows the photolysis of water. Now we are going to study what? Photophosphorylation. Try to understand the meanings of all these sentences or words. Photon means generally that is considered to be light. Phosphorylation, that is in presence of light, addition of phosphates takes place, which gives rise to ATP. That means ATP synthesis is done using ADP plus one more inorganic phosphate. That is synthesis of ATP takes place in presence of what? Photon, that is phosphorylation. Phospho is the word related to phosphates. Photo is related to word light. Photon is light. So in presence of light, there is addition of phosphates which gives rise to or produces ATP. So synthesis of ATP in presence of light, that is what photophosphorylation. Do you understand? Okay. So now this was again explained by Ernon and his associates in 1954 and first showed that isolated chloroplast can produce ATP when exposed to light, and this is phosphorylation or photophosphorylation. Okay, first it supplements the energy for production of CO2 utilizing NADP H plus H and end product, that is the end product of light reaction, that you will not understand right now. Just remember that photophosphorylation is synthesis. So addition of phosphate is what? Photophosphorylation. In presence of what? Light. That is photophosphorylation. First you remember this thing. Is it clear up to this? Photophosphorylation. You split the words. Photo in presence of light, phosphorylation, addition of phosphates in presence of lights, which gives rise to ATP synthesis. That is what? Photophosphorylation. Now you remember there are two ways of photophosphorylation. One is cyclic way of photophosphorylation and the second is non-cyclic way of photophosphorylation. That's why this you will not understand this part immediately. When I will explain these processes, then you will understand clearly. So you remember that photophosphorylation takes place by two ways. One is the cyclic way and the other is the non-cyclic. We will discuss step by step. Now, cyclic or non-cyclic way of photophosphorylation, which needs light. That means this is light dependent part we are talking about, as we discussed that there are the three steps in the production of food material that is to complete the process of photosynthesis. So first step and second step, they involve light. That means they require light. So those two steps now we are talking about. What it takes place? Photolysis of water, Hill reaction we discussed, and then second important thing, that is what we are talking is photophosphorylation. Now photophosphorylation is taking place in two ways. Which are the two ways? These are cyclic and non-cyclic way of photophosphorylation. There is some problem with this. I will come to that point again. these are light dependent, where light energy is converted to chemical energy. And what is the chemical energy? Second step, light dependent, that is formation of ATP and NADPH. So that we are going to study now. How ATP and NADPH is going to produce, and these are the two ways. One is cyclic, the second is non-cyclic. Now these light dependent reactions, again I will revise that what happens in those light dependent reactions. We are now talking about light dependent reaction. Only first two steps we will study today. Okay. First is capturing of light by using, who is capturing the light? Who is capturing the light? Grana, which shows the presence of thylakoids. What the thylakoids show? These all photosynthetic pigments, chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, xanthophylls, carotenes. These are all pigments, right? Then when the maximum amount of energy is absorbed, then what happens? There is excitation of electrons. I will show you with the help of diagram next. And then when the electron is excited from the outermost orbit, then that is accepted by some electron acceptor. So that is, these electrons are transported from one electron acceptor to the another one. That means the electrons are carried or transported. Okay, so electron transport takes place, and during that transfer of electrons, an amount of energy is released, and that is stored in the form of ATP. And then, or NADPH, that I will show you. So what is ATP? ATP. You have learned it in the previous biomolecules. A is what? Adenosine. T, triphosphate. Right. So this shows the presence of adenosine. This is adenosine. These are the triphosphates which are attached to this sugar molecule. So adenosine triphosphate is the simplest form of energy utilized by the organisms. Very easily it is used for different purposes. For different activities, this is the usable form of energy. Okay, so during photosynthesis, light energy from sun is converted into chemical energy in the form of molecules such as ATP and glucose. This is glucose. Okay, so glucose, these are the triphosphate. Tri means three phosphates are there, and this is the adenosine, nitrogen base, if you remember. Now this light dependent reaction, as you know everybody, that I have explained already what is the requirement. Light, chloroplast that contains chlorophyll, that is thylakoid, and light excites electrons. Now what happens, we will see. Light dependent reaction, this how this ATP is formed from ADP, and these where the electrons which are excited from the reaction center, how they are transported, that I will show you. So as I mentioned, cyclic and non-cyclic way of electron throw. Why it is called cyclic and non-cyclic photophosphorylation? There is electron flow transported or transferred, carried from one reaction center, which comes back to the same in the cyclic way, that is cyclic electron flow. And when the same electron doesn't come back, that is non-cyclic. I will show you in the diagram. See, this is the simplest structure. See, this is photosystem 700 or pigment system 700. What this P700 represents? 700 is the maximum absorption. At this wavelength, this photosystem, what it includes? Photosystem means these are all pigments. Main pigment, that is chlorophyll A, and the accessory pigments, these yellow colored structures, can you see? These are the accessory pigments, and this blue colored is what? Main pigment, chlorophyll A. Understand? And this chlorophyll A absorb maximum light of wavelength 700. So this is called as P700. So photosystem 1, or this is also called as pigment system 1. P represents photon or as well as pigment. So P700. What is 700? You understood? maximum absorption is at this wavelength 700. So there at this wavelength, the sun, from the sun, the photons light is captured directly by chlorophyll A also, and all these accessory pigments, also, they are capturing light energy and they are passing to the reaction center. So chlorophyll A is what called as reaction center. Now when the amount of energy received by chlorophyll A is maximum, then what happens? From the outermost orbit, electrons are released, and these electrons are captured by primary electron acceptor, and then from one electron acceptor to the another, in this way that those electrons are transported, carried, and then again the same electron comes back to the reaction center. The electron which is excited from the chlorophyll A molecule, that is the pigment system 700, this chlorophyll A molecule, the same electron comes back through transportation, by transporting or carrying from one electron acceptor to the another electron acceptor. Okay, and during that transportation some amount of energy is released, and that is by produced in the form of ATP, that is stored in the form of ATP. Is this clear? How this is cyclic way? Cyclic way of electron transfer means what? Electrons are transferred. The electron which is excited from chlorophyll A comes back again to the same chlorophyll A in a cyclic manner. That is why this is called as cyclic electron flow. Understood? Now we see what are these acceptors. In your textbook also, this diagram is there. Now you can see the textbook, that is cyclic photophosphorylation, 12.7 figure. That diagram you can see. See, this is pigment system 1, as I showed you at 700. Then this is the light energy from accessory as well as directly from the sunlight, that pigment system A, that means which contains chlorophyll A molecule, that is received. Then the electrons are excited and first of all accepted by ferredoxin reducing substance. Then it is transferred to the ferredoxin, then from ferredoxin to the cytochrome B6, and then cytochrome F, and then accepted by plastocyanin, and from them the same electron comes back to the chlorophyll A of pigment system 1. So this is the cyclic way of, or cyclic manner of electron transfer. That's why this is called as cyclic photophosphorylation. Why photophosphorylation? What happens in photophosphorylation? I told you. Synthesis of ATP. Addition of phosphates is what? To what? ADP. Here at two places you can see when there is transfer of electrons from ferredoxin to the cytochrome B6 and from cytochrome B6 to cytochrome F, some amount of energy is released. When there is transfer of electrons from ferredoxin to cytochrome B6 and cytochrome B6 to cytochrome F, during that transfer of electrons, some amount of energy is released, and that is accepted by ADP to form ATP. That this is what inorganic phosphate added to ADP. So ADP is what? Adenosine diphosphate. Then one more phosphate is added. It becomes tri. Understood? So this is one ATP molecule and this is the second ATP molecule. So how many ATP molecules are produced in this cyclic way of electron transport? How many? 2, isn't it? So have you understood what is that cyclic photophosphorylation? Cyclic way of electron transport it is, because the same electron which is excited, released from chlorophyll A comes back to the chlorophyll A, same chlorophyll molecule, but in a cyclic manner. And what happens during that transfer? Amount of energy is released and stored in the form of ATP. So ATP is synthesized. That means phosphorylation is taking place. That is what called as photophosphorylation. All this is taking place in presence of light. So this is called as photophosphorylation. Have you understood? Are you getting my point? Understood? Yes or no? Yes. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, this is again another way where I have shown this is the pigment system 1. accepted by pyridoxine reducing substance and pyridoxine to cytochrome B6 and cytochrome B6 to cyto F. At these two places ATP is produced. This is first ATP, this is second ATP, and then from cytochrome F by plastocyanin, and then the same electron is received by chlorophyll A molecule of pigment system 1. Is that clear? Cyclic way of photophosphorylation. Now we'll come to the non-cyclic way of photophosphorylation. Here, instead of one photosystem, two photosystems or two pigment systems are used. It is not enough for the conversion of this light energy into chemical energy just to produce ATP, but it produces one more type of compound, that is NADPH. And here also there is transportation of electron. Electrons are transported and carried from one, they are transported and they are transferred from one electron carrier accepted by the another. In this way there is transfer of electron, but that flow is not the cyclic. Whereas the electron which is released from photosystem 2 doesn't come back, the same electron doesn't come back to the photosystem 2, but it is accepted by photosystem 1. And then from that photosystem 1 or pigment system 1, the electron is released and that electron is accepted later. So this is non-cyclic way of photophosphorylation. Here also phosphorylation is taking place. That means what? Addition of phosphates, where synthesis of ATP and NADPH is there. That photophosphorylation means in presence of light it is taking place. Now how it takes place? As I told you that there are two systems used. Pigment system, or this is also called photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. Now you know photosystem 1 maximum absorption is of what, at what wavelength? 700. Now for pigment system or photosystem 2, maximum absorption is at 680. So you remember, for photosystem 1 maximum absorption 700, photosystem 2 maximum absorption is 680. Okay, so see, this is the way. Now I will show you. This is the photosystem 2. So it is shown by P680 maximum absorption. This is the photosystem 1 maximum absorption at 700. Now what happens in the first stage? From the sun, the photons are received by chlorophyll A as well as accessory pigments. You can see in the diagram. Then from accessory pigments, it is transported to the main pigment, that is chlorophyll A of this photosystem. From there it is accepted by primary electron acceptor, and then it is at the end means through electron carriers, that is called as electron transport chain, because electrons are transported in a sequential manner from higher energy level to the lower energy level, like that. So that is called as electron transport chain. And so from one substance, electron acceptor accepted by the another, and at the end accepted by the first pigment system, that is what? Pigment system 1 of wavelength 700. Now from there, these electrons are again another electrons. These electrons released from pigment system 2 are accepted by pigment system 1. Now here from pigment system 1, again it receives the photons from accessory pigments and sunlight, and chlorophyll A of pigment system 1, it there from that chlorophyll A, electrons are released, then accepted by primary electron acceptor, and again it shows the chain of electron acceptors. During that process, what happens? NADPH is produced. So here from primary acceptor of pigment system 2 to pigment system 1, what is produced? ATP. Whereas from pigment system 1, here whatever the electrons are released during that transportation, the energy which is produced is NADPH. Now how it takes place, I will show in the another diagram. Similar way, but little difference is that is not the cyclic, but it is non-cyclic way. Have you understood up to this? Now what are the electron acceptors that we will see here? Now from first pigment system 2, that is 680, electrons, they are released from the outermost orbit of chlorophyll A of pigment system 2, and they are accepted by plastoquinone. Actually in your diagram it's not very clearly shown, but that's why I am showing you with the help of these diagrams. Try to understand that coenzyme Q and then plastoquinone is the substance which accepts the electrons released from photosystem or pigment system 2. Then these electrons are transported through a chain of electron carriers, first accepted by cytochrome B6, then cytochrome F, like pigment system 1, you know, isn't it? So there, during that transfer, amount of energy which is released, that is stored in the form of ATP. Here is one synthesis of ATP molecule. Then from cytochrome F, accepted by plastocyanin, and then from plastocyanin, that is accepted by directly pigment system 1. Okay, so electrons released from pigment system 2 are accepted by pigment system 1. Now what happens during that process? Again, the chlorophyll A of pigment system 1 receives energy from light as well as accessory pigments, and then because of the more amount of energy, what happens? Electrons are excited from the outermost orbit, and then these electrons are accepted by first FRS, that is ferredoxin reducing substance, and then these electrons are accepted by ferredoxin, and then what happens? This ferredoxin accepts, combines with NADP, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate, that is, and when it receives protons or hydrogen ions, then NADPH is formed. Now where this H comes from? Now we have learned first step, Hill reaction. You remember just now what happens in Hill reaction? What happens? Photolysis of water. Try to understand and remember. Okay. So what happens in photolysis of water? Splitting of water molecule into H and OH. Here, this takes place. So during non-cyclic photophosphorylation, at the same time, this photolysis of water takes place. So two molecules of water, if you consider for equilibrium, two OH and two H are produced. Understood? Lysis lysis of water, that means breaking of water molecule. H2O, when it breaks down, forms H plus and OH minus ions. Is it clear up to this? Now in your textbook itself, this splitting is shown. That is page number 141. That splitting of water molecule is shown. But for equilibrium, it is shown as 4 molecules of water. Here also the same thing is seen. So during non-cyclic photophosphorylation, splitting of water molecule takes place, and during that process what happens? Whatever H plus are produced and OH minus are produced, right? If you consider 4 molecules, so 4 OH and 4 H. Is it clear up to this? Clear? Then these H which are produced, H plus molecules, ions, not molecules, these ions are accepted by NADP to form NADPH. Are you getting this point? Where this from here up accepted by FRS, then FD, and then it combines with NADP, and that NADP, it receives hydrogen ions. That from where this hydrogen ion comes? From where it is coming? Through photolysis of water. That's why I'm telling you. So through photolysis of water, whatever hydrogen ions are produced, they are accepted by NADP to form NADPH. Is it clear? Understood? Then what happens with this OH? This OH also, again, what happens? This is OH minus, H plus and OH minus. This is what seen with the splitting of water. Now this OH minus, when electrons are removed from OH, it becomes only OH. That negative charge is removed, right? So electrons are removed, and these electrons are accepted by what? This pigment system. Understood? So electrons which are released from photosystem 1 they are accepted by photosystem. Isn't it non-cyclic way? The second thing is what? When electrons are removed from that OH, then what will happen? Without charge, it is showing that OH. Then again, depending for equilibrium, if you see this OH, 4OH, what it is showing? 4OH plus 4 electrons which are released, that are accepted by pigment system 2. And these 4OH that gives rise to H2O plus O2. That means what? This photolysis of water that gives rise to formation of or release of oxygen. We studied in Hill reaction, photolysis of water. Water comes from water or CO2. That oxygen comes from water or CO2. Water. And that is what this non-cyclic way of photophosphorylation proves. 2 points you need to remember. That is what? Phosphorylation take place. That means what? NADPH as well as ATP is produced. At the same time, photolysis of water is taking place. That means oxygen is. So these are the chemical reactions you need to remember. How the photolysis of water takes place. That means breaking of the water molecule takes place into H plus and OH minus ions. These H plus ions are accepted by NADP to form NADPH. And these OH from OH minus electrons are removed, which are accepted by photosystem 2. And then that OH, it forms what? 4 molecules of OH, they form water molecule and oxygen is released. Is that clear? Now, last point, I will just come to this. Yes, just 2 minutes. So this is again very clearly shown in this diagram. This is what pigment system 2. This is the reaction center, that means A. These are accessory pigments. In this diagram, again it is very clear. I showed you in the previous diagram, but still I will show you. So from all these accessory pigments which receives light energy, they transfer it to chlorophyll A, that is the reaction center of pigment system 2, where the maximum absorption is of 680 wavelength, right? Then electrons which are released, they are accepted by coenzyme Q, then from plastoquinone to cytochrome B6F and plastocyanine, and then by photosystem 1. Then again this photosystem 1 receives photon from light, and this chlorophyll A, that is the reaction center of this photosystem 1, receives energy from accessory pigments as well as directly from the light, and the electrons get excited from the outermost orbit of this reaction center, and then these electrons are accepted by FRS, ferredoxin reducing substance, then ferredoxin, and then accepted by NADP, and then this NADP, when accepts the electron, it becomes negatively charged. When accepts the electron, then during the photolysis of, at the same time, see here, photolysis of water takes place. 4 molecules of water get splitted into 4H and 4OH. Can you see here? This is very clearly seen. 4H, these are accepted by NADP minus, but there are 2 molecules, so it becomes total 4 electrons accepting 4 protons, that is hydrogen ions, give rise to NADPH2. Clear? And these 4OH, again, when electrons are removed, they are accepted by photosystem 2, and that becomes then without charge, again splits into this 4H, gives rise to water molecule and oxygen. So phosphorylation, that is formation of ATP and NADPH2 takes place, as well as photolysis of water. That means what? Release of oxygen with the photolysis of water takes place. This is what the non-cyclic way of photophosphorylation. So you are going to learn. I will stop here because only light dependent part, the first 2 steps we have learned. Remaining, which is independent of light, that part we will learn next time. Tomorrow again we have lecture. So I'll stop my presentation, but students, be there because your next lecture will begin within a minute.